Okay, so whenever you start feeling upset, and if you want to run to the comments, before you do so, read this sign and remind yourself that we're having a nuanced conversation, okay? So recently, a YouTuber who I watch, who I respect, named Rebecca Watson, Skepchick, posted a video called "The No True Leftist Fallacy." Basically, in her video, she's arguing that the people who are commenting in her video saying the majority report aren't leftists are committing the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? So first, let's go over what that is. The no true Scotsman fallacy, or appeal to purity, is an informal fallacy in which one modifies a prior claim in response to a counterexample by asserting the counterexample is excluded by definition, rather than admitting error or providing evidence to disprove the counterexample. The original claim is changed by using a non-substantive modifier, such as true, pure, genuine, authentic, real, or other similar terms. Here's an example, and this is all from Wikipedia. Person A: no Scotsman put sugar in his porridge. Person B: but my uncle Angus is a Scotsman and he put sugar in his porridge. Person A: but no true Scotsman would put sugar in his porridge. Hi, my name is Malachi Juarez, and I am a student political scientist and journalist. I disagree with Rebecca's assertion that these people are engaging in the no true Scotsman fallacy, and my counter argument is that Rebecca and her commenters are talking past each other. I think that many of her commenters don't live in the United States, and they are looking at our political system from the outside, and they are using terms that are similar to our terms that Rebecca is finding, like she finds it grating, annoying, or smug, or whatever. But unfortunately, both parties are right to some extent, and both parties are wrong to some extent. So the no true Scotsman fallacy is committed when an arguer satisfies the following conditions: not publicly retreating from the initial falsified posteriori position, offering a modified assertion that definitionally excludes an unwanted counterexample, using rhetoric to target the modification. So if you're proven wrong, you don't change your position. If you don't change your position, you also have to post hoc include that thing in the exclusions of your definition, right? So no true Scotsman would put sugar in his porridge, so the modifier is true to your original definition because it wasn't originally part of your definition, right? And that's where it becomes a fallacy, because you can't make definitions for things on the fly. My counter argument is that these people have a definition already coming into this conversation. So what is the left to Rebecca? In the United States, the left wing includes Democrats, Democratic Socialists, and Communists. And the right wing includes Republicans, Libertarians, and Fascists. The reason why this is the case in the United States is because popularly we think of it as split down the middle of our Congress. So there is the aisle, and there's bipartisanship, and bipartisanship is usually described as reaching across the aisle. Republicans sit on, depending on your perspective, the one side of the assembly hall. Democrats sit on the other side of the assembly hall, the left and the right, right? But internationally, that isn't the case. So in the center of the United States politics is liberalism. This is why these people are called libs so often. And liberalism is when the state's function is to protect private property. Liberalism is not capitalism, but is compatible with capitalism. So when these people say that they're not leftists, they're saying they are not anti-capitalists. Liberalism is, but also at the same time, they are conflating liberalism with capitalism, which they're not the same thing. Capitalism is a mode of production, and liberalism is an ideology, a political ideology. Capitalism is when private industry extracts wealth from lower classes through labor. The production of wealth serves capitalists. Socialism is when the state redistributes wealth through the public ownership of industries. So the production, the mode of production favors society, socialism, right? Capitalism and socialism are modes of production, not political systems. In the United States, we have a capitalist mode of production, a liberal dominant political ideology, and a federalist democratic republican system of government. That might sound like nonsense or a mouthful, but I will define each of these terms. Federalism is a combination of central and regional governments. Republicanism is democratically elected representative governments, right? And democracy is when the people compose the body of government. So in our Constitution, federalism is not explicitly said the word, but they talk about the state and the federal government. That's federalism. Republicanism is when people are elected to represent. It's the same thing as representative democracy. That is, they're synonymous. And in the Constitution, it calls it republicanism. It calls it republican. Democracy, when the people compose the body of government. Democracy isn't in the Constitution, but the people are in the Constitution. We compose the body of the government. That doesn't mean that people get all the say. In fact, the United States democracy has historically been exclusionary for a lot of groups, including like the people we had as slaves, you know? So what is the left wing historically? When people who are international, like people outside the US, when those people who are anti-capitalist, they're communists, they say that the US has no left because they're referring to the French National Assembly. Historically, the left and the right was meant to denote revolutionaries, the French revolutionaries on the left of the General Assembly, and the right, conservatives, the monarchists. They were on the right because they were anti-revolution. That's the difference to many people internationally. It's different than the way we use it. In the United States, often we say the left to mean anybody left of center. And when we say leftists, we just mean left-wing partisans. The left's partisans, people who refuse to be bipartisan. But that doesn't mean that's not what people are saying when they're talking about internationally. They're talking about a communist body, a political movement of revolutionaries. Now, the United States isn't monarchist Russia. There isn't a small cadre of people that could be assassinated and then boom, it's a different type of government. The United States is much more complicated than that. And in my personal opinion, revolution for the United States doesn't look like the same for Russia, right? It is done by changing the mode of production from a capitalist one to a socialist one. And so the leftists in America, according to the communists, are going to be the people who are interested in that. And so Rebecca's video, the end of her argument is that she claims it's harmful because if we say everybody who we disagree with is in our political movement, then we ignore the people who are in our political movements when they do something problematic. For example, basically she's saying that, if Cesar Chavez is a real leftist, then we can't say anything about him raping people because real leftists don't rape people. But that's not the argument anybody's making, right? Maybe some people, but that's not the argument that the people commenting are making. They're saying, specifically a few of them that she shows are saying that they are not leftists because they're not anti-imperialist. I personally would define it as anti-capitalist, but some people go with imperialism first, and that is a pre-hoc definition that they came into this conversation with. They did not modify their definition. Therefore, it's not a no true Scotsman fallacy. It's not a fallacy at all. And in fact, I would argue that the piece that Rebecca makes is not only attacking a straw man, but it is conflating a few terms. So, and I don't think it's harmful to discuss these. In fact, this is what I wrote. It is not harmful or dangerous to discuss the differences between different political ideologies, political systems, or modes of production. What is harmful is discouraging open political discourse and obscuring the goals and purposes of political movements. So it isn't a no true Scotsman fallacy if the original claim remains unmodified or if evidence is provided to disprove the counterexample. Person A, no, and here's my example. Person A, no leftist supports the capitalist mode of production. That's what these commenters are saying, right? Person B, but the majority report are leftists and they support the capitalist mode of production. And so there are two responses to this that you can make without engaging in the no true Scotsman fallacy. Either you say, which I think this is the position of the original commenters, if they do, they are not leftists, because leftists do not support the capitalist mode of production. Yeah, they say true leftists or real leftists, but the thing that is making the fallacy isn't the word, it's how the word is used. Person A, and I think this is Rebecca's position, they do not support the capitalist mode of production and are therefore leftists. They're anti-capitalist, at least ostensibly. Sam Seder doesn't call himself a socialist. In fact, he avoids political labels, probably for this exact reason, because it's confusing to talk about and it makes politics more complicated when you should just be talking about policies. But what is a socialist policy? Jamel Bowie made a video that I strongly disagreed with, that I don't think he even kept up, where he basically said that social policies are like socialism. But that's not true, because socialism seeks to change the mode of production, why we produce wealth and who for. The only socialist policies, strictly speaking, are that of nationalization, nationalizing key industries for the sake of society. That, and as far as I'm concerned, I believe that if that were to come across the table for Sam Seder, if someone said, hey, we have the political capital to nationalize the oil industry, I think Sam Seder would stand behind that. So I personally think Sam Seder is a leftist. But that's the argument that's being made, not whether or not, if they're true communists, then they can't rape people, right? Like that's so above and beyond what anybody's even saying. And it's almost like Rebecca is falling into her own trap here by, she calls these commenters smug for correcting her on these technicalities, but then her correction is smug and wrong. And I agree that if someone says that no true leftist would support Graham Plattner after the fact, that is the no true Scotsman fallacy. And there are probably people who committed it, but not the comments that she showed. And so, to go over it one more time, the United States has a capitalist mode of production, a liberal dominant political ideology, and a federalist democratic republican system of government. Capitalism isn't a form of government. Socialism isn't a form of government. Leftism isn't a ideology. It is a relative term to either describe the left wing in America when we use it, or to describe the communist revolutionaries in other countries. That's what that term means. So Rebecca and her commenters are talking past each other, in my opinion. And another thing is, she says that this distinction is a matter of opinion, and it's really not. There is a difference between socialism and capitalism. It's outlined very specifically. It's not an arbitrary designation like whether someone is true. And to sort of close this out, it may be a fallacy to say that no true Scotsman would put sugar in his porridge, but it wouldn't be a fallacy to say no true Scotsman isn't born in Scotland, right? That would be an argument. And that'll be it. Thank you for watching. So I wanted to do a little bit of a postscript, a couple things I forgot to say. I would include other redistributive policies to be socialist policies, things involving the taking of wealth from capitalists and dispersing it to the workers, like free homes, like free healthcare, like free education. I think that one can make a reasonable argument that that is a socialist policy. Cuba, China, DPRK, they all do those. I consider those socialist countries because they are under a socialist mode of production after a revolution, even if they have market capital going on, right? So another thing I do want to mention is this conflation of progressive with anti-capitalist or communist. Historically in the United States, and this is an undebatable fact, you can double check me, progressivism has been a response to socialism. It is the liberal response to socialism. It is welfare. It is meant to preserve capitalism. And that is another reason why using a term like progressive, like Rebecca highlights this progressive label on the Majority Report's website, one of the few labels they're willing to use. But you know who else went by progressive and who was a avatar of progressivism during the original progressive era? Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was also famously an imperialist. And so this is another one of those reasons why these communists are saying anti-imperialism comes first, and progressivism doesn't mean anti-capitalist. In fact, I would argue that if you are more willing to say you're a progressive than a socialist, that is because you agree with the capitalist mode of production, because you are not socialist. Just like the New Deal Democrats, they did welfare, they did Social Security as a response to socialists, not to do socialist policies, right? And you can argue that this is just a bunch of like nitpicky bullshit, but the people who identified themselves as progressives during the progressive era, people like Theodore Roosevelt, people like Woodrow Wilson, these people hated communism. They hated socialism. They talked a lot of shit about it. And so historically, that term, that label progressive doesn't mean what you think it means. And sure, we can give it a new shine nowadays, but that doesn't change the fact that the intention of the progressive label is to imply that we are doing social progress without abandoning the capitalist mode of production, which is the cause of all of our problems in the first place. And so that'll actually wrap this up. Thank you.